Hi guys, welcome back to another Train Brave podcast. I'm Renee McGregor.
I'm Chris Hendy.
And today we are delving into more uh, closely into how you train the female athlete. So what I mean by that is like kind of understanding the difference between male and female and how they respond and how we respond not just to training physically but also the communication and the language that needs to be used and the education around how you ensure that they become empowered and kind of meet their best. I think from my point of view, the other thing I want to help female athletes understand is how to manage your expectations a little bit more. You know, like we are quite an unusual species in that we have all these hormones flying around all the time, and we do have more hormones flying around generally than men, so just going to put that out there. We have all these hormones flying around, and this means that no 2 weeks are the same for us. So, you know, like I've spoken about this before, but it's you have certain weeks of the month where seriously I feel like I could just smash every session and feel amazing and like, you know, just think, yeah, this is I'm strong and I'm fast and I'm powerful. And then literally 2 days later, 3 days later, it can feel like the complete opposite. And I used to beat myself up about it a lot. And then I started to notice the trends and realize that actually these changes were happening at specific times of the month. So it made it so much easier for me to just become a little bit more kind of just a bit more compassionate towards myself, you know? So I know at certain points, and I think you've picked it up as well, Chris, when you're training me, at certain points I can't balance on one leg at all. Like it just falls apart completely. And yet the following week I can be smashing the same exercise and it's not a problem. So I guess like what we want to do is just kind of give you some insight into what we've experienced and how we see the differences between coaching men and women. And I'm going to kind of throw it open to Chris first, because obviously you've learned a lot. I know, I mean, you've always been a great coach, but you've learned a lot in the last 12 months since I've kind of come into the network a little bit more and we've worked together a lot more closely. So I guess the first kind of question would be like, you know, what are the key things that you've learned about working with women?
Well, obviously, yeah, I've been a coach for quite a long time now, and when it comes to kind of being working with women, obviously, it's been a learning process for the last probably well, a long time, 10 years plus. But I guess my experience it comes from I'm coming from a place of experience where I've obviously had Polly, my wife, obviously been a professional triathlete, and obviously being her kind of husband, partner, coach, etc. I've had to watch that process of watching a young lady, a young woman becoming, turning into an athlete, a full-time athlete. But everything that comes with it, the kind of the undulation, the roller coaster ride that comes with it, as you say, like month to month, peaking with great sessions, kind of troughing with these kind of really subpar or these average sessions, which are kind of unexplained because sleep's on point. Like she's eating the same stuff, but this emotional kind of roller coaster that she was on. And being a partner and coach, you're just along for the ride, but you're trying to kind of work out what you can't really explain it. You kind of just say, well, it's just not your day, or you just maybe you weren't mentally there in the moment. But over time, you start to kind of think, well, maybe it's more than that. And then obviously when we came together, I've kind of very quickly realized it was a lot more than that. And it's been a really great learning process for me, because in the fitness industry, especially even in my gym with all my clients, it's probably a 65 70 30 split, like female to male. So most coaches, I would hazard, whether you're a running coach, triathlon coach, whether you're a strength coach, you're probably looking at a larger percentage of females to males. So you should, you want to be like knowing how to deal with women, because women are going to be making up most of your client base. But yeah, I've really learned like so much. And the three things I've always wanted to do with women, was obviously with people, essentially, is kind of empathize, educate, and empower. And they're the three things I've always kind of pride myself on trying to make sure I kind of do with everyone I work with. But since being with you, Rini, it's really kind of taken that understanding to another level, because it's kind of I've been able to really deep dive into the why these reasons. You said to me about your balance and you're having those like low those average sessions, subpar sessions. and again, it's like that kind of the hormonal, like the whole hormonal differences at different times of the month, and that's really kind of allowed me to then, when I am sitting down with a new client, or when I am doing a virtual, like I've been doing lots of virtual kind of consultations recently, and I'm not, you know, that it's now part of my interview process. It's part of my consultation now. It's like, okay, you know, what's your training program like? What, you know, how much strength training have you done in the past? You know, any previous injuries? All those common questions. But now there's a whole new battery of questions that I can kind of sink in there, which are like, so, you know, how's your cycle, like, you know, what's your relationship like, kind of with certain things, how's your sleep. There's so many things now that have become much more holistic approach to the way I coach because of our relationship. So yeah, it's been a great kind of
That was that will pick that up. Maybe do that a bit again so that
but
doesn't
yeah,
come.
no, but it's been a great learning process. Like, it's been a great learning process the whole way, and obviously it's going to be continuing to learn. You know, about, because every woman's different, every woman's story is different. You know, everyone has a different journey and lifestyle, and that all has different implications on the person that you're working with in front of you. So with you, Rooney, you know, you're very, you know, you're a unique person to work with.
Mhm.
You have your own stresses, and you're a very busy woman, both professionally and socially, and so that all has impacts on training, and that's obviously, that's our main focus together, is to make you optimal. But yeah, you know, we have to consider so many different things, not just your training. So yeah, it's been great so far.
I think one of the things that I find is quite interesting in my own practice when I've worked with males and females is when you do an interview, when you first do your first assessment with a male athlete, they generally tend to be very much about numbers, and as long as you can give them enough data, they will accept what you say. And it's quite interesting because you can say, you know, right, you need X amount of carbs before this type of session, you need to refuel with X amount of carbs and X amount of protein, and they accept it. It's not a problem. When you work with female athletes, food is quite an emotive subject with females in particular, and I think that's a societal thing. I don't, you know, it's not just like, oh, women are more emotional about food. It's come from societal pressures, you know, like there's, you know, Susie Orbach wrote that book all those years ago, you know, fat is a feminist issue. Like, we've had these pressures for years and years and years, and I know there's a lot of kind of there's a lot of backlash against it, with, you know, people talking about diet culture and body positivity and all these different things. But fundamentally, unfortunately, still, if we read between the lines, aesthetics does seem to play a huge part in a female's confidence. And I'm not talking about Red S or eating disorders or anything like that. I'm just talking about females in general.
Yeah, of course.
We know it's feeding into males as well. So I don't want to completely rule out men, but I know that, you know, women feel pressure to be accepted, and I think that's where it comes from. It's not about, although we would say, yeah, but I feel more confident if I'm X amount of body fat percentage or whatever it might be. Fundamentally, when I always question that is, but why? And it always comes back down to approval and acceptance, because to be accepted in society, we have been told for years and years and years and years that women need to look like X. And I guess that pressure is always there within you as a female. And that's why our relationship with food is probably a little bit more emotive than men from that point of view. And so I guess that's one of the big things you have to take into consideration when you're working with a female athlete, is that they will always do the work you give them. Because let's face it, all the women that we've worked with are incredibly driven and passionate about achieving their goals, whether that's, you know, completing an Ironman, or whether that's getting stronger, or whether that's, you know, completing a 5K in less than 20 minutes, whatever it might be, they're very, very passionate about it. And while I'm one of those women, and I know that I am, I still will question a woman and say, but why? Why is that so important? What does it say about you? And I guess, like, for most women, it's about proving their worth. Like, I think, again, I can't speak for all womankind, but I know from my own personal, for myself, I want to prove that I'm equal
Hmm.
and strong like a man. Like, I can, like, I know this sounds really sad. I still get pleasure if I overtake a man when I'm running along the canal, secretly.
Hey, if you can come for a run with me anytime, and you'll always overtake me.
But what I mean is, it's, and I remember the first time I raced, and I, and I did really, really well. And a couple of guys came up to me afterwards and said, "Don't like the fact that I got chicked, but well done anyway." And it was quite an interesting, kind of observation. But I guess that's the thing. Like, whenever I do race, I do tend to race in the sort of probably the front half of a race, generally speaking, where you are generally with more guys because it's just the way it seems to be. In ultras, I think it's quite different. Like, in ultras, there's more women at the front generally than guys.
Mhm.
But yeah, I guess, like, I think, like, going back to why we're talking about this, it's being able to understand. If you can understand the motivation behind a woman, you can then ensure that the language you use and the processes you put in place to support that female from a training point of view is going to get optimal outcome, right?
Yeah, and this is the thing, right? It's for like being a coach. It's easy to think it's just optimal performance, right? It's like you can get I, and I'm just thinking here about always about all the different women I've ever worked with, especially my wife, obviously Polly. And I'm thinking, like, she dominates men, that she always has done in terms of running and cycling and swimming. She was dominate. I mean, I'm nothing compared to her. Our first date was going for a run, and that was my biggest mistake because obviously, I didn't realize what I had pocket rocket. I had started dating because she left me for dust, and I remember just suffering the whole time. But obviously, like, when it comes to like that, the why behind working with that individual, especially women, it's so easy to think it's just optimal performance, and a lot of the time it's not. There's so many other factors to consider, and like, the training is the easy bit. And I will always say this, but would say this when you're as a coach, you get to a point in like when you've got a lot of experience, you kind of know the best ways to train someone. And so training someone is not the hard bit. It's understanding the why and the behind of the individual, and that's when you really have got to start to really understand and build that relationship quickly with that individual, because you can't just start throwing and layering intensity into someone, because it's easy to do that. Like, and I see so much of that from these coaches. They think that that's the most important thing, and it's not. Like, filling someone's Training Peaks account with X, Y, and Z is so easy. It's like anyone can do that. Like, you can cut and paste and just drop anything into that account, and they'll do it. Understand, taking several moments to understand mindset, relationships, work life, like, are they socializing, what's their relationship with food, what's their sleep quality like, so many things. And it's amazing how as soon as I started asking those questions, while after us working together, boom, instantly, like, you immediately start making different changes to the training. You start adjusting, okay, maybe a little less work here, a bit more focus on this, bang, optimal performance. Like, percentages, just everything started to increase, speed, power, like mental acuity, like everything started improving. And it wasn't nothing to do with the weight they were lifting or the reps they were doing or the times they were doing. It was all the other factors, because I've been empowered myself to ask better questions. I think that's what it takes a lot of the time, is to experience. With experience, you have a much better ability to ask better questions. And I think that's one of your skills, really, is that you, after years of doing this, you don't just ask the obvious questions. Like, you ask the right questions, and you only need to ask one question, and it's like they're like, I've never thought of that. Okay, that's probably pretty significant. And that's what I know a lot of our girls and we work with, they've realized, they've been searching for months and years for that reason, of that answer. And you did it with Polly. Like, you sat her down for a couple of coffees, and we just talked through it. And it was actually, for us, it was taking away exercise to a certain degree. You know, we had to really dumb down a lot of the exercise because Polly was going from a professional triathlete mindset where she was training every day, metrics going through her mind, constantly thinking about competition, training every, you know, to suddenly going, right, if you really want this, you're going to have to kind of change some significant things. And we thought we had done it. And me being a co-coach, Polly being the athlete, we hadn't done as much as we thought. And, you know, and so I guess it's having that team around us that really helped us, and having you in our corner really helped. That shifted everything for us. So, yeah.
And I think definitely what you're saying there about coaches arming themselves with information, because fundamentally when we work with somebody, we all want a good outcome, right? Like the client wants a good outcome and we want a good outcome. Now, as an individual who is very aware that I work in a very challenging profession and a very challenging area of nutrition, I am also very, very conscious that sometimes outcome will not happen. And I have accepted that. It was difficult when I was quite a young junior practitioner, but through experience, I've realized that sometimes you have to change the boundaries of outcomes. So in an ideal world, I would always want someone to have a much better relationship with food and exercise after they've stopped working with me and be able to get the best from their performance. However, in some cases, I have to accept that even if they just get a slightly better quality of life, even if they are still functional in their behaviors, then that's also enough. And that you only find that out from when you start working with somebody and work out where they are and what their motivators are and what their barriers are and whether you can push them. But fundamentally, going back to coach client relationship, we all want, you know, nobody comes to you and goes, I don't really care what you do with me, Chris, because I just want to do this for fun. Like nobody does that. Like everybody wants, you know, everybody wants something, whether it's an aesthetic, whether it's a you know, fitness goal or a strength goal. Everybody wants something. So if you want to empower, as we've talked about, understanding the female body is one way of doing it. So as you just pointed out so clearly, smashing a female every single week with the same kind of training program is not going to work, right? Because again, females are really hard on themselves. A lot of women they're more critical of themselves than men generally. There's some good kind of psychological proof about that.
I'm going to have to jump in, right? Because there's a thought I need to. I see a lot women training, like female athletes training with male athletes. So obviously a lot of triathlon clubs, running clubs, and the coach is obviously treating them all as one. You know, and it's you know, how I mean, this is a question we would like to maybe think about how we answer it. But you know, how would you go about kind of making sure that the females potentially are not training, not being so hard on themselves, because obviously I deal with a lot of female athletes who kick themselves for not keeping up with the boys or keeping up with the men, and you know they don't, you know, and it's just not the same mindset. You know, there's going to have those obvious dips that we're aware of, but do you know what I mean? Like how we go about kind of educating the coaches to better communicate with their athletes, or even just obviously start first and foremost being aware of that situation, that scenario, but then obviously how would you expect them to go about communicating that? Because obviously I've kind of learned how to do that within the gym space, class environment, you know, like, you know, groups of people. Hey girls, like, you know, I'll pull someone to a side and say, hey, just, you know, don't be too hard on yourself today. We're going for a PB squat today, but you know, don't feel like it might not be, you know, if you're not feeling up to it, don't worry about it. You know, like you straight away are kind of aware with sort of our females, like don't worry, you know, like if you're not in the place to do it, it might not be the day. So yeah, I think it's an easy one to sort of say, but then it's hard. It's not so easy to kind of implement it on a group scale. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, I think actually it could be, and I think this is one for coaches. Is one way I would do it is if you are working with a group of male and female athletes who are training together, get to know your female athlete cycle. Like lots of athletes are now, like lots of coaches are now asking their female athletes to put their cycle on their training peaks or whatever method of monitoring they're using, and I think get familiar with it, because chances are you will start to see that in the kind of the middle phase of their menstrual cycle. So I'm talking probably from day 7 to about day 15, 16, roughly. And it is rough. They will be smashing it. They'll be able to keep up with those boys, and they will be on par. Because of the way the hormones are at that stage, we are at our best during that kind of phase. So it's also when I tend to do my best pull-ups, or my best bench press. but it's so important, because as a coach, you could really empower a female athlete at that moment by saying, you know what, we're going to do whatever the 5K time trial or whatever it is that you're doing once a month during that period. Now, the difficulty is obviously is aligning all the females to be at the same time. That's the hardest bit, right? That is difficult. But maybe it's something, you work with your group, that you have certain groups, and they do them at different intervals, so that everybody is actually benefiting from that kind of competitive environment, which is so important. But equally, what we don't want to do is, I don't want female athletes to come out of a session like that feeling they've got to push even harder, when actually they're probably already maxed out.
Yeah, that has to be a massive thing from this podcast today, to you guys, is the ability to be able to step outside and understand why. Like, all these things that we talk about is, being a good coach is allowing the individual, the athlete, to understand more about themselves. And I think, like, some this type of discussion is kind of, give yourself a break, understand the why behind, like, these dips, sometimes it could be nutrition, sleep, etc. But in this case, it's very much a physical thing. It's an uncontrollable, it's a natural, all these things. But your ability to go, okay, yeah, that makes sense, it's that time of the month, etc. Like, it's not, it doesn't have to be, it's not a crutch, but it's just it's like, it's potentially, it's factual. So just go with it, like, and I know a lot of the girls, like high-end athletes we work with, they know it. They'll walk in and they'll tell me straight away that, hey, well, you'll say it to me.
Yeah, I'm quite open.
Don't expect gold from me today, kind of thing, and it's like, cool, like, but what would you say the percentage is? I mean, what's the drop? When we talk about this, like, probably not a good idea to be peaking or trying to max out lifts, or try and look for that peak performance in it when you're in this kind of in this state, but this time of the month. But I mean, it's not. I mean, what sort of percentage is it? 10% drop, 20% drop? Is it, can we put a number on it or not?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think studies have been done to put a number on it, to be honest. So I don't think we can put a number on it. But I think what we know is that when it's like basically when progesterone starts to rise and takes, it becomes more dominant. So this is the second half of your menstrual cycle. So post ovulation, progesterone starts to rise. It's during that phase, it's the progesterone, the effect of the progesterone. So it's also this time where women get really cross with themselves because they find themselves having cravings. So they want more sugar, they want more chocolate, they want more bread, they want more, they want, and they beat themselves up about it so much. And it's like, well, no, actually the progesterone means that you do have higher demands, because you are burning a higher percentage of sugar when you do anything. Even just sat at your desk, you're using much more sugar, much more carbohydrate. So that is why your body is demanding sugar. And again, beating yourself up about it, like, this is something I want to try and get through to females, is that we have to be, it's not being kinder, because I think this whole self-care kind thing gets a little bit kind of blurred sometimes. It's about being more forgiving of yourself. It's about being able to say, do you know what, yeah, I am significantly hungry. I need food. That's okay. To respond to that is a positive thing.
Do you know why? Because it brings consistency. It allows for consistency. I understand this, guys, is that the fact, because what happens is, as soon as if you start behaving poorly towards that kind of that mindset, that's when you start restricting, or you start behaving suboptimally, and so you've got to understand the why. And the more you can understand this, the more you can accept this, the more consistent you can be in terms of with your everything, in terms of your emotional state, everything, all the way down to your training. So I think this is why it's so important to talk about, isn't it? Because it's about being consistent, managing your energy levels, managing your fueling, managing everything, so you are able to be consistent forever.
So when I speak to female athletes who are racing during this period of time, I would say to them, like, right, okay, we know your period is due in 3 days, right? We know this is probably the worst time for you to race. However, that doesn't mean it's going to be the worst race. It's about being aware of it. So what you need to understand and remember is during this time, your heart rate will be higher. So monitor your heart rate when you're racing, because obviously if you go up too high, you will end up hitting the wall, right? Because you'll use your carbohydrate stores too quickly. Secondly, your carbohydrate stores will be up. So if you normally would be okay with like 30 grams of carbs per hour in a race, you're going to have to go up to 60 grams of carbs an hour and just accept that that's what you're going to have to do.
Is that, are you throwing numbers around, or are you actually doubling that?
No, this is this. So if I give you a case study, and she won't mind because she asked me to be her crew. So last year I crewed Ali Young, who is on the GB 24-hour team, and she's an amazing athlete. And she did the Grand Union Canal, the race, and it's 155 miles, yeah. And I crewed with her and ran with her, not all of it, obviously. And it was great because we met up the night before, we were chatting, and she said, really, like, my period's due, like, da da da. And I was like, okay, well, we're gonna have to change fueling. We have to change it because our strategy is not going to work, because you're going to need a higher amount of carbohydrate. The other thing we have to be aware of is she always gets quite hot. Like she's actually incredibly muscular, so she's got a very high metabolic rate anyway, but she actually tends to train hot and run hot quite a lot. But obviously, again, because she was in this phase of her menstrual cycle, again, your temperature goes up, your core temperature does go up, so you have to learn to manage it. So again, we've been able to think about that the day before. We've got enough sponges, we've got ice, so we could put like, a nice vest on her, and we could cool her off. And so we could change the strategy completely in one day, because we were so aware of where she was in her cycle, and she was so open with me about that. She came first, obviously, and she did great. She did absolutely brilliant. And it's like, just because we're females and we may have these limitations around our cycle, that doesn't mean we can't work through them. And I think that's the bit that you have to remember, is I'm saying, yes, be more forgiving at times, but also, that's just Bailey joining the podcast, but also remember that there are strategies and things we can do. So upping your fuel intake during a race, that's a simple thing to do. A lot of women won't do it.
Do you think some people right now are thinking it's not fair? Being a woman it's hard. Things are harder. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm thinking there's two camps right now. People are thinking, bloody hell, this is more variables to consider. And it's, the thing is, that's part of racing, though, right? If you want to get those extra, if you want to be great at anything, you've got to drill down into those variables and go, right, what do I need to tweak, what do I need to improve? And this is huge. I mean, this is game changing. Like, some of you probably never really considered this, and the fact that if you start actually being more aware of it and start behaving slightly more differently, in terms of improving your carb intake, etc., game changer, right? Because your performance is going to go through the roof in relation to what it was. On that note, I want to continue your thought, but I want to talk about the advantages of being a woman going long, because obviously there's been talk over the last year or plus about these certain individuals, I can't name them, but have done amazing results because, well, is that a myth? I don't know, that females are potentially better going longer than males. I mean, because of hormones.
It does seem to be. I mean, there's not enough evidence yet to suggest that it's a consistent thing, but there does seem to be, particularly in swimming, it's coming through. There's some definite good research that shows that in longer distance, kind of like the open water type swimming events, females are doing much better.
Consistency of like the fat tissue, or like, what is that?
It seems to be a combination of the ability to utilize more fat for fuel generally, and having a slightly higher fat body fat percentage. But then there's also the mindset of the female, right? And I think, one of the women you're talking about, she'd had a baby and she'd done an incredible race while also still breastfeeding and all that kind of. I'm not sure personally I would be advocating that, but that's not something I want to talk about today. However, one thing I still use when I'm racing is the mindset that I gave birth twice naturally. If I can do that, I can bloody well do anything. And it does help my mindset, basically. And I think women can be a little bit more resilient mentally than men. Um, and again, I think it comes back also to the fact we can sometimes be a bit more adaptable as well. Like we're a bit more flexible and adaptable. Like with I'm not saying this is a generalization, but um, men can be very, again, I see this in the 24-hour team, and we've worked with it, but the men can be they're very disciplined with their nutrition plans, and kind of it's very specific, and they don't want to deviate from it, because it's what they know. Whereas a lot of the female athletes will go, right, this is my plan, my rough guide, but obviously, really, if you start seeing any changes in me, just throw at whatever you think you need to throw at me. It's quite an interesting.
But I think this is quite like, I don't like, I hope no one on this listening that takes our generalizations as like as gospel, because obviously we're just coming from a place of like experience and some anecdotal evidence. But like I think like for me, the difference between me and Polly, I'm like a machine. I'll just eat sometimes because I know I have to, and I'll probably eat the same thing 3 nights in a row. Polly, on the other hand, will have, she likes to have, like to eat different things, and she has a bit more consideration about things. And I've even noticed that when we train, like, I'll just eat the same thing, and but then, Polly would, yeah, she said there's like it's this difference. There's definitely a difference between the male and the female, but it's not always going to be the case, I think, with every man and every woman. But I think a lot of the time, yeah, I think you're right. Like in that mindset towards like just keeping things really simple and black and white. I think men sometimes, I find it's much easier to give a man just A B C. With other women, a lot of the time they want a bit more to have to deliver deliver a lot more, but which is fine. But it depends on the individual, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, we are being generalistic, so please don't take this as gospel. But obviously, yeah, I think there are big differences between male and female, and we know that the brain of the male and female is different, and how they, generally speaking, women's emotional brain is much more engaged.
Oh, I've got to talk. When it comes to like coaching, like when you really get down to the coaching level, and I think a lot of coaches don't actually coach as much as they think they coach. Like there's coaching on like a superficial level where you're kind of giving training out, right? And you're giving out instruction, and this might, I'd be interested to see what people's thoughts are, but you give out training programs, right? But then how much further deeper do you go with your athletes? Like what type of program are you delivering where you actually go and deep dive into that individual? Because we're coming from a place where we sit down face to face opposite someone, look them in the eyes, and like ask them those deep questions. That's the difference, I think. Is like kind of being like there's training someone, like, and then there's coaching someone, and like there are levels to it. And we're coming from a place where I'm addicted to deep diving with people. Like I love finding out more about them, because obviously it allows me to give them a better program to optimize their performance, etc., etc. And that's the difference. And I always think about this, think, why didn't they think that? And I think, well, it's probably because they don't want to go that deep with that individual, or they try and stay above it. But I truly don't believe that you can really help someone on a deep level, like on a high level athlete, unless you go down into those areas. And some athletes don't like you going there because it's kind of vulnerable. It's where they're vulnerable. But if you don't get into those areas, you won't. That's where the gold is. I think that's where some of the magic is, like where you can really get some big wins. So yeah, I think there's a hierarchy to the level of coaching out there, and some of it's kind of broad and umbrella like, and there's others that really kind of get into it. And I think that's probably where me and you come from, if that's fair to say.
Yeah, and I think so. And I also think that, just to kind of be a bit of a diplomat in this, I think that some women, they don't want to be treated differently to a man.
True.
They feel incredibly strongly about the fact that why should I be? And, I kind of get that.
How do you mean by that though? Like, I mean, you're not obviously making it obvious. Like, I'm not. Oh, but like you don't need to make it that obvious that you are treating them differently. You kind of just, it's just you don't make it obvious to the group or anything. You're just asking. You're just putting a few other extra questions into the conversation that you probably wouldn't do with a man. I mean,
Yeah,
do you know what
and
I
I
mean?
think, I think, as you know, I'm very much pro this, because I think if you tailor, like you would tailor nutrition to your training program to get the best results, if you tailor training to hormones, you will also get your best results. And this has been, it's fairly new in terms of scientific kind of exploration, but there are lots more PhDs and studies going on around this subject at the moment, because we are definitely seeing the influence of the different hormones and what they do. It's interesting. My interest in estrogen, actually, it sounds ridiculous, but my interest in estrogen actually came about when I first started working, I suppose, with females who had eating difficulties but were athletes. And the reason being is I've always known that there's been this link between low estrogen and bone health, obviously, which is a very, very established link. And D'Souza did the first studies on that, and we know that's very, very clear cut. But then I started to see things like if females had their cholesterol tested, for example, when they had no menstruation going on, so they had no estrogen available, their cholesterol would be really, really high. And I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, this person's not putting in enough energy, so why? And there's definitely no fat in her diet, so why would her cholesterol go up? And so I started exploring this, and started seeing the links then between how estrogen is so important for the regulation of the amount of cholesterol females produce internally. So it's a protective factor. It's also why when a woman goes through menopause and she's postmenopausal and her estrogen levels have dropped and she doesn't go on to hormone replacement therapy, it's often why their prevalence and incidence of cardiovascular disease goes up, because they no longer have the protective factor of estrogen. So that was kind of like my first, like, right, okay, this is really interesting. And then I started looking at estrogen generally as a hormone, because I just think I'm just a bit of a nerd, as we both know. And so I started looking at it further, and then started seeing the links with cognitive function. And I'm like, my God, all these women I'm working with who just can't be rational, they can't quite put A and B together to come out with what, you talk to them and they're like, yep, I get it. And then they go out into the big bad world of their own, and they just can't quite do it. And again, there's some very, very, very clear evidence around the importance of estrogen in cognitive function and mood. So again, with anxiety, and again, if you look at postmenopausal women, are a really interesting group to look at, because they basically show you the signs of anybody who has low estrogen or no estrogen. You can see you're going to basically have exactly the same, but you won't be postmenopausal. You will have, either hypothalamic amenorrhea, or you'd be oligomenorrheic. I can't even say it very well, but where it's irregular. And then most recently, I've been doing some research, because I'm working with a group of, I suppose, mentees. I'm mentoring them, and they are individuals and individual dietitians, some working within the acute inpatient eating disorder unit, some working in the community, some a bit like me who have done a bit in the community, in inpatients, but now are kind of setting up their own practice. And so I've taken on just a few people to mentor, and we've had some really great discussions. And we had this one case study that was brought to our attention, and this individual's cognitive function had rapidly declined, and I asked all the questions in the same way we ask questions to our clients. And I asked the dietitian the questions, what's going with her menstrual function, what's happening with her cycle, what age did she start, etc., what weight was she, all these different things that we would ask. And it transpires that the cognitive function declined rapidly when her period stopped. And she's in quite a bad way, this young person. And so I said, well, there's new evidence, and there's a good study that's come out. There's new evidence that actually using hormonal therapy, particularly estrogen therapy, can really help with body image, and really help with cognitive function, and kind of rationalizing mood. So I think we have to be mindful. We have to be aware that estrogen has always just been associated. You learn it in biology, and it's just associated with having periods and having babies, and that's it. It is super powerful, this hormone, and it has great performance benefits for us. So again, a lot of women don't realize that unless you have regular menstruation, you have, you know, estrogen circulating, you won't get the lean muscle mass adaptations you're looking for, because you can't produce your, you know, your IGF-1, so your growth hormone. You can't produce that if you haven't got enough estrogen going on. So it's got a lot of properties that people are not aware of. And again, I say this a lot, but it comes back down to the fact that we have dumbed down sports science, and I think we've dumbed down fitness and nutrition so much, because I think, you know, we've moved away from some of the kind of the clinical studies that I did when I was at uni, and it's just become like, you know, you do a course on this and do a course on that, and you can suddenly, you've got a diploma in nutrition and whatever. And I'm not being negative. I'm just trying to explain to people that if you really want to help someone, you have to have an understanding of the whole body.
When you work, obviously you'll work with EIS and everything, and working at the higher levels. I got off a phone call yesterday with one of the top guys. I won't say his name, but he was, you know, he works in, like, you know, he's worked for the Lawn Tennis Association. He's worked for like cricket, cricket, in England cricket, everyone. But it's funny how, like, the system set up at the highest level. They have all these athlete management systems set up, multiple people, professionals in certain areas, making sure that obviously athletes are being looked after from different, you know, every angle, you know, everything's being monitored. And obviously that's peak performance, obviously that's elite performance. And what you're saying right now is obviously dumbing things down. It's obviously hard for grassroots coaches to obviously try and people like an amateur level to be able to kind of get hold of all those resources. But I think what we see a lot of is people leveraging too much of one thing. So they leverage the training too much. So they just go, right, that's what the elite are doing in terms of training. So I'm going to do the training as hard as I can. And that's what a lot of the amateur coaches are doing as well, is they're going, right, 5 times a week, 6 times a week, I'm going to do these types of sessions, hills, intervals, etc. But what they're not leveraging and they're not taking into consideration is all the other MDT, multidisciplinary team kind of work that's going on as well. Where, you know, are you aware of what their emotional state is, their mood state, their stress levels? Are there, you know, when was the last time they had their bloods done? What's their nutritional intake? There were so many things that kind of come at a high level, and I think that's like, dumbing it down is kind of such a simple way of saying it, but like, you're just taking I think what a lot of people are doing, they're just leveraging one aspect of what makes great performance or a healthy individual, and they forget about all the other things that come into factor. And a lot of people we talk to, they're obsessed about the one thing that's the obvious thing, but they're not taking into consideration all the other amazing factors that build a great human, or keep a human healthy kind of thing. And I think all of you guys listening have got to kind of understand that there's so many other factors that you and especially as a woman, you should be taking into consideration if you truly want to be, if you want longevity in the thing that you're doing, whether it's running, triathlon, swimming, whatever you're doing. If you want longevity and wellness and health forever, you've got to have all those things. I mean, we talk about yours all the time, don't we, Brini? Like, we know, we talk about, like, you know, you love to run, you love to train. Training's not an issue. Like, working hard is not an issue. Like, but it's all the other stuff that you're making sure. But socializing, you know, you like having a drink and, you know, etc. You like having, you know, but it's all the other things, like, you know, sleep. Is it, you know, like, it's so many other things that we always talk about. But yeah, I think that's my thoughts on that, I think.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you know, like, yes, I've worked at the EIS. I'm going to be honest. Again, even the high level coaches there were not always interested in what I had to say, because they couldn't put it together. They couldn't see how it fitted. And I think the difficulty you have is that you've got to remember there's this very tiny window where any athlete, but we're working with female athletes at the moment, we're talking about female athletes, where an athlete will maybe push really hard with training. They may not consciously, but subconsciously, or even when I say consciously, voluntarily, they might involuntarily lose a little bit of weight, and they may get this great performance, right? And that's all the coach sees, is that, right, that was the performance of the life. That was the one we need to recreate again and again and again. And they go back to recreating that training environment, but they don't look at the individual and go, this individual, it cannot sustain this place.
Yeah, yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, it's not sustainable, and that's the thing, isn't it? Like they peak them, and then they go, well, let's try and peak him again. Let's try and peak him again, and instead of just trying to elevate that slowly and bringing up that level as a whole, they're ramping it up the wrong. Well, they're ramping up variables too quickly, too often, and there's no consistency there, and that's when obviously people break and fall to the wayside, right?
Well, this problem is that if a female athlete has got to that point where they've performed really well, but actually in the process of getting there, they've lost their period,
Hmm.
then that's not sustainable, because we've just talked about the importance of your period and estrogen, and that, not just from a lean muscle mass point of view, but then we're starting to affect bone health, we're starting to affect mood, we're starting to affect performance. And so while you may get that one hit wonder, that one opportunity where you do really, really well, you won't be, it's not repeatable. And that's really important to understand, because that's unfortunately where women, I find the female athletes I work with, they get stuck because they remember that point where they performed really, really well and they want to stay there. But what they don't realize is they probably pushed it too far at that point as well. And unfortunately, pushing it to that level has meant that they'd already created the perfect storm for things to become dysfunctional.
I see this in bodybuilding, like
Mhm.
it's a wonderful, it's amazing sport in itself, and the fact that you're optimizing every single detail to get into that one optimal state, peak performance where you are sub 5% body fat. Like you've done everything right, okay, to get to that point, and you look amazing to in your own eyes, in front of for a show or for a picture, and that picture's on your wall, right? And you then associate perfection with that picture, but the physical state that you're in is completely unsustainable. Like it's completely, if it's almost torturous to get into that position. It in the back of your mind, that was the hardest thing you've ever done to get into that position, but you constantly go back to that. When you go back to your normality, you still associate that period of time or that picture as it got as perfection. And in fact, obviously, you've sacrificed everything to get to that point. Nothing's sustainable. And I think that's probably the point you're making as well, isn't it? That it's totally unsustainable. But what I will say is, elite performance, it's always going to be a fine line, right? Isn't it? Like it's always a knife edge. Like to find the peak state performance, you're going to fall off either side every now and again, but it's your ability to come back onto that line and be able to sort of remain healthy. Like you must deal with numerous people who are in elite state where their body, in terms of strength rate ratio, body fat percentage, it's right on the wire. But they must lose their period, but then how quickly do they regain it? That must be a sign of where they're at physically, surely.
Yeah, and it's not a practice that I would encourage, but obviously when you are working with these very elite level athletes, to a certain degree, you do need to periodize their training and their nutrition, knowing that chances are they may, during a 6-week period leading into a major race or event, they may well skip a period. But the key thing is being able to get it back within the next month. So, we always, the Endocrine Society's rules are that a female should have at least 9 periods a year.
Wow.
So
Okay, that's cool.
that's kind of what we work towards. So
So
if
who says that? Sorry.
the Endocrine Society.
No, that makes, like, straight away you're thinking, well, it immediately thinks like 3/4 of the month of the year you should be.
Yeah. And I think, like, the thing about that is because we know that beyond that you're starting to really negatively impact your bone health, and that obviously is a problem if you're an elite athlete, right? So you're right, it's very, very finely managed.
But it's always going to be like, we shouldn't I don't want to sugarcoat that, because obviously I work with amazing athletes female athletes have done, who you have to work hard to, you are getting into that physical state where there are, but then how long should you be in that state for? Like my personal experience, probably didn't have a period for 10 years.
Yeah, that's too long.
Oh, exactly, of course. But then, being on the pill, being a young woman, going straight into training full time, we didn't even think of it. We were completely oblivious to the impact of, and we just thought as soon as she comes off the pill, as soon as she wants to, boom, it will happen. 4 years later, we're still waiting. So the body was completely rocked by that. And but that's where we're coming from. That's the place I'm coming from. Where that's my our background and our experience.
The other thing I was going to just actually, because you've mentioned that, I think that's really interesting because we're talking mainly about female reproductive hormones here. So we're talking about estrogen and luteinizing hormone and FSH and all those hormones. But the other one that I think is really important to bring up in conversation, because I've seen this so much as well, is thyroid. So it's really important to understand, this is males and females, but again, we're discussing females. But if you are doing endurance sport and you have a very heavy training volume and load, you will impact your thyroid function. So what happens is the thyroid function can get so affected that it can look on paper like you have hypothyroidism, like your thyroid function is not working. If you are a healthy individual who doesn't do sport and you present into any GP clinic with a slightly dropped thyroid function, with the thought that it could be hypothyroidism, the general practice is that they would say to you, okay, we'll leave it 12 weeks and we'll repeat. And then they'll repeat the test. And then if it's still low, they'll go, do you know what? We'll leave it another 6 weeks and then we'll repeat, because they don't want to really put you on thyroxine, because that being on thyroxine long-term has its own issues, right? What we're seeing in sport is that lots of young individuals have basically been overtrained or overreached, or they're pushing themselves really hard and it's affecting their thyroid function. But the standard practice would be that you then reduce training volume for 12 weeks and you repeat the test in the same way. And if it still hasn't improved, then you would take training out for 6 weeks and then you'd repeat the test to see whether your thyroid function can reboot. But what's happening is people are being put on thyroxine immediately. Now, when you get put on thyroxine at that point, you're basically ending up down regulating your normal thyroid function completely. Like, that's it, you've really affected it. And we also know that in these situations, it can have a negative impact on your bone health as well, because it affects all the other interactions with parathyroid hormone and everything else. So the issue we've seen in our clinic is that there have been a numerous number of female and male athletes that have been put on thyroxine way too early. And when we then sort of start discussing with them what's going on and everything else, they realize that they've had RED-S and overtraining. So we're trying to reboot their whole system. We've had to start weaning them off the thyroxine because they don't need it. Their body can make it itself. It's just they'd put into a state where it wasn't good. Now, the problem with that is it can then take their body years to reboot. So they get frustrated because they feel so awful, because also your thyroid function is your metabolism. It's kind of what gives you energy. So they feel frustrated because we're titrating the thyroxine with producing your own, but really until you take the thyroxine out that you're administrating, you can't really produce your own. So you're going to have this period of time where you feel rubbish. And it's like, but if you have done that for several years and your body has kind of stopped producing it because it's forgotten how to do it, it is going to take time a bit like the period. It takes time for it to reboot.
So I would think about like a timeline, like how long you've been doing something for so long, and then you expect that immediate results. And like for obviously us, it was 10 years. So we were like, well, if it's not happening right away, well, how long have we been abusing this system? We've been abusing the system for a long time with overtraining and a lot of, so Polly, obviously, when I say we, it's me and Polly, it took us 3-4 years, because it took that long for us to not only back off the training and we're on Clomid, we were on so many different things to try and reboot the system and, artificially stimulate things. actually it was the natural law of things that we'd had to really we had to take control of the variables, the natural variables, which were backing off the training, being fueling more appropriately, and then time. And the one thing that our society hates doing is being patient. And like what you're talking about there is like it's our society in a nutshell right now, where we just want no. I want to get me back tomorrow. They will not accept the fact that there's a natural law of things that you have to accept. People come in to me and they want to lose weight, but they've been abusing their body for 20 years and they want to change their body in 6. There's habits that you've completely reinforced in your system for decades, and then you're telling me you want to change in 6 weeks. I could force it, but guess what? It's going to rebound, or it's going to get nasty. It's going to end up getting worse. And I think, is that fair to say that there's that kind of, yeah?
100%. And I think that's it. Like, people want outcome, but they don't always want to put the process in.
Yeah.
Particularly when it comes to these things, like training. Yeah, you give them as much training as you want, they'll do it. But they don't want to look at the bigger picture and get the right balance. And I will say this, and I will say it again and again and again. The human body is complicated. It is not simple, like calories in, calories out, training in, training out. It's not as simple as that. It is a very, very finely tuned system of different processes and interactions, biochemistry, endocrinology, physiology, psychology. Let's not forget, like, all 4 of those have to be nurtured, and I'll use that word nurtured, have to be nurtured if you want to get optimal outcome. And that's what we don't do enough of.
But it's simple as well, because like if you like in a rawest form, if you step back and go, I'm going to back off our energy output, I'm going to improve my energy input, I'm going to rest more, and I'm going to just kind of think about other, like take my mind elsewhere, body restores itself. But it's also the bloody hardest thing to do. Obviously, all those things are the hardest things to do sometimes, because we're so set in our own ways, and we want to force the issue. But like, going in hindsight, looking back, we did everything. It took us 4 years to kind of mentally get ourselves into a headspace where we were expending less energy, putting better fuel into our bodies. We started thinking about other things, so we started to put a bit more effort into the business, and it happened naturally. But when you're there, it's complex. You overthink it, and so it's that kind of, the system is amazing. The body is an amazing complex system, but the principles are quite simple. But to apply them is, in this complex world that we live in, is I think the hard thing.
But I think it's hard because we've started to use external sources to decide what we do. Whereas if you listen to your internal signals, it tells us, like, you've got nothing. Just look at George, right? He knows when he's had enough milk and he's thriving, right? We are all born with the ability of knowing what we need to be, to a certain degree. We learn about our circadian rhythms, so we learn that when it's dark we sleep, when it's light we get up. Like, we know all this. We're that's why we're so interesting, and we're so complicated, but we're so fascinating to study. That's why I've always wanted to study us. But we still, and I think obviously more and more and more so with the rise of social media, with the rise of different apps, like, everybody's using external sources to validate their behavior, when actually it's all there. And like, just going back to kind of like that female hormonal cycle, if you listen to your cycle, if you listen to your body, and you fuel it accordingly. So you eat the carbs when it's saying, I want more carbs. And other times you will notice that actually then, as soon as you get your period, actually you're just not that hungry anymore. Like, you can see it. And by doing that and responding to your own internal rhythm, you will get the outcome you're looking for. And I think like that's kind of where I'd like to end today, really, is just kind of for females realizing we do have a rhythm, we do have this hormonal rhythm. Nikki Kay, who I work with, has, I love how she puts it. She says the female hormones are beautifully choreographed like a dance. They go up and they go down, they go up and they go down. And I think that's a really beautiful way of looking at it. And I think learning to be in tune with your body is probably the best gift Chris and I can give you, and help you to get the results you're looking for.
Yeah. No, love it. I mean, yeah, I think that's what we both of us strive to do so much, is just make sure, get people to listen to themselves more and evaluate themselves a little bit better and step outside of themselves and go, okay, where, what could you just be adjusting here, and just thinking about more here, and you're going to find what you're looking for. But you need that team around you. Like, you need to have one or two people that you can really kind of just drill down into that there, and allow to have that conversation. I think to have those, to talk about those certain things, because if you talk about those areas, those different areas we've talked about today, you will find what you're looking for. Like, you will find those answers. It will take time and patience, but you will find it.
So guys, we're going to end it there. If any of you have listened to this and thought, you know what, that makes so much sense and I'd really like to find out more, I have actually written an ebook on this, and it is going to be available shortly. So we'll put the information, we'll make the information available as soon as we know when that's going to be out and where you can purchase it from. But also, as always, if you have any questions, let us know. We're quite keen to do another live Train Brave, I think. So Chris and I will discuss the timing of that with both our diaries, and then we'll do the same sort of thing. We'll put that out to you guys, give you the link, and we'll look forward to you joining us. So for now, stay safe.
See you soon, guys.